Well, folks, I'm excited to be here with you. This is, I've watched some of the recordings, but it's the first time I've been able to join live. And so this will be fun. I'm looking forward to talking with you real quick here. So let me go ahead and start up. I only have a few slides to go over. Really, the goal of this is to introduce you to a feature that's part of Microsoft Graph, and it allows you to pull in email into your custom apps, and you could even do a lot more than that. But as Vesa mentioned, my name is Dan Wahlin. I'm a cloud developer advocate at Microsoft. And like I said, I'm really excited to be here to talk with you today. So let's jump on in. A lot of you probably know all about Microsoft Graph and know that you can get to things like mail. You can get conversations from Teams, files, events, calendar items, meetings, and more. And the list just goes on and on and on. But I know there might be a few of you that say, yeah, I've heard of it. I know a little bit what it is, but maybe I haven't done it. So I'm going to speak to you real quick. If I were to sum up Microsoft Graph, I'd say that it's a secured, unified API. And that means I can learn one general API and get access to all the stuff you see on the screen here and much more, actually. Now, you might wonder, why would I need access in this case to, say, email? Well, let's say we have a customer application, and in this application, people can work with customers, orders, maybe invoices, stuff like that. You know, there's only about 1 million of these out there that some of you have probably written, actually. And how many times have you worked in an app where you say, you know, to complete this info, whatever I'm doing, I'm pretty sure there was an email I received or I sent, or maybe there was a calendar meeting scheduled about it. And then you jump to your email client. If you're like me, you kind of forget what you were doing in the first place. You get distracted, and then you're like, oh yeah, the whole reason I was here, because then you start checking email, was to get this one email to then plug that information into the app. A lot of context shifting there, and there's a lot of organizational data and intelligence that as developers, we just don't generally think of. We kind of think of forms over data, database-driven apps. But what if you could take your app to the next level and actually bring content that would be valuable to users where they work? Now, of course, if you're going to access their email or their files or things like that, it needs to be very secure. So everything I'm going to talk about relates to Microsoft Identity. And once we've authenticated and done a little bit more from a coding standpoint, we can get what's called an access token. And that access token is kind of like the key to say, hey, Microsoft Graph, I want to be able to get this or this or this. Now, the user, and there's a couple of ways you can do this at the app level or the user. I'm going to talk about the user today. They can actually then accept, and you've probably all seen this, you know, this app would like to access your email in read only or maybe read write, or this app would like to get to your files. So you have permissions that the user will have to accept. Assuming they accept that, though, we can use the access token that will be generated, and we can actually make these calls. And that's what we're going to talk about. So the good news here is I only have about 15 minutes or so. So this will be really quick, but this is all in a Microsoft Learn module, as mentioned earlier. So everything that you see here, you can get to after. You can get step-by-step instructions. I'm going to walk you through just a quick high-level overview, show you a quick demo, and then we'll kind of jump into the rest of this will be up to you. So what the Learn module will have you do is we need an app. Well, we'll have a GitHub repo you can clone. Then we need to register that app in AAD, Azure Active Directory. It'll walk you through that. And then this is a .NET Core demo I'm going to do. Now, I want to emphasize that you could be doing Python or JavaScript or Java or whatever it may be, and you could do the same thing. Today, I'm going to focus on .NET Core, but again, it's open to pretty much any language and framework just about that's out there. So we're going to be talking a little bit about middleware real quick, a custom class called Graph Email Client that's part of this module for Learn. And then we're going to show how to use that to call Microsoft Graph and then ultimately render emails. So with that, let's go ahead and jump on in. Now, I'm going to open VS Code, and the only reason I really debated this, I have Visual Studio on here. I'm on Windows today. I also work on Mac a lot. But I know some of you are on maybe Linux, some are on Mac, some are on Windows, and this works anywhere. So I just wanted to emphasize that and make that point clear. So I'm going to go ahead and do it in VS Code. Now, let me first start off by kind of showing the demo. When you go to the Learn module, they'll have you clone a GitHub repo, and that's going to have a begin solution that you'll work with. I'm going to work, given that I have about 10 minutes left, with the end solutions. You're not going to see a lot of typing, but I want to run this demo just really quick so you can get an idea of what you can do. So we're going to do a standard .NET run. It should be pretty quick because I've already built, and there we go. So you'll notice localhost 5001. So I'm going to run over to Edge here, and I already have 5001 up, and let's go ahead and hit this. Now, you'll notice right off the bat, and you're all pretty used to this, the custom app is now asking me to, log in, give my credentials. Well, that's because, as you're going to see in this module, we'll walk you through registering your app with Azure Active Directory, and then I'm going to talk about the middleware code that kind of ties that to Azure Active Directory in just a moment. Now, I have a developer tenant. If you don't have one of these, you should get one. They are super cool. This was mentioned earlier. You basically get your own Microsoft 365 environment, and you can even be admin. So if at work they deny you from doing certain things, you can do whatever you want with this one. All right, so let me go ahead and log in. And this is in a private window, so it won't really matter if I stay logged in. And what this should show is my profile to start. Now, if you go through this Learn module, this part of the code will be done for you. But you're going to notice I have Welcome Dan. I went into one of my users that the custom developer tenant gave me, renamed it to myself, put in my photo. And then up here, you'll notice I can sign out. And then this is actually my, my fake cloned, I guess you could say, status. And right now I'm busy. And if I actually went to Teams and changed that to available and then refreshed, then this is also using Microsoft Graph to kind of show presence. And that's kind of cool. You could integrate that. Now, we're not going to have time to go into that today because we're going to focus on the email aspect. So this is now pulling email live from my developer tenant that I have. There's some other, just as a heads up, I think beginning of February, I'm back to talk a little bit about calendar events. We're going to do kind of the same thing. And then there's already been, I think my colleague Bob German, who you all probably know pretty well, he gave a talk on files. You can upload, download files and things. But when it comes to email, email's a little interesting when it comes to what we typically call paging. So email, we typically batch. And the reason is that what goes into your inbox, not just email, right? You have calendar invites and other things that can show up as well. So what this call to Microsoft Graph will do, which I'll show you in a moment, is it'll actually filter out the stuff that's not email messages. So now if I come down to the bottom and say next page, it's not contiguous as far as the order goes. So in other words, if I had 25 things in my inbox, but 5 of those were meeting invites or something, then this will automatically take that out. So luckily, there's a way to grab the next batch of email without having to write any custom code to say, ignore this, ignore this, ignore this. It'll just kind of do that for us. So really nice. All right, so that's just what you'll end up building in the demo. So I can go ahead and I can do the normal sign out, close my browser, those type of things. Okay, so let's spend the rest of the time by going through some of the code here. And what I'm going to talk about just really quick is, first off, there's going to be 3 key assemblies that this project will use. You'll see Microsoft Identity Web, Web UI, and then Web Microsoft Graph. This is where most of what I'm going to show you is going to come from, but there's some extension methods in just a moment. They're going to come from these top 2 as well. So I'm going to jump to our startup CS. Now, if you've done .NET Core at all, and if you haven't, don't worry, because it's similar no matter what language or framework you use, just different code, obviously. But we have our standard suspects here. This is, if you're new to this, this is what kind of fires up, one of the first things that fires up. So we register our configuration, and then this is where we configure our services. And quite honestly, this is generally the most challenging thing to get right when you do this with pretty much anything involving security, right? The good news is, first off, I don't have this memorized. I am really good at leveraging code I've already written. How many of you, quick show of hands, borrow from yourself on a very frequent basis? If you do, that's good. But I do want to walk through just really quickly some fundamentals here. So you'll notice we have some services, and we're going to configure using extension methods, things like what are we going to use for authentication, OpenID Connect authentication scheme. We want to add Microsoft Identity, the web app. You saw I just used that actually to log in. But this is these next two are the really critical pieces for Microsoft Graph. Notice enable token acquisition to call downstream API. What's that mean? Well, once I logged in, what did the homepage show? It showed a profile. This allows the token that we're going to get back ultimately to be used to call Microsoft Graph. That's what this is setting up, and you'll kind of see that in the comments. And then we actually add some configuration information from app settings into this add Microsoft Graph extension method. From there, we have some other things like where are we going to store the tokens? In this case, it's in memory cache. There is some other options. Now, the last thing I want to point out in this section is that you'll notice right here that we have this authorization policy builder. What this is going to do is actually make it so you have to log in to every page, even the home page, because I'm going to call Microsoft Graph. I need to know who you are. All right, now that's the main middleware, and that's a really quick overview, I'll admit. If you check out the Learn module, there's a lot more detail on this, but this is one of those things you generally get right once, and then you call it a day, and then you're good to go. Now, I'm going to jump down. There's some bonus stuff in here that's commented out, but I want to jump down to these guys. This is where we're going to register for dependency injection, some custom classes. So you'll notice earlier I got the profile and I got the email, and I could have shown calendar and files and stuff like that. Well, this is the last piece we're going to talk about actually today. The final piece in this file I want to show you, though, is we configured everything for the middleware. This is actually where we then say, okay, let's use this as middleware. And if you're new to middleware, it's kind of like a subway. The request is like the subway going this direction. Maybe it goes east and it hits this stop, this stop, this stop, and something happens at each of those stops. Like we check your credentials, we check for a token. And then what happens when the subway gets to the end? It turns around, and then you can have response subway stops that could add a cookie, for example, add a token, things like that. So if you're new to it, that's kind of what middleware does. It's kind of like a subway train. All right, so the next thing we're going to talk about, I think, is the fun part. And I do want to emphasize, let me show one more quick thing here. So when you go to this Learn module, and I'll have a link again at the end, and you hit Start, there's going to be units. And one of the units, and if you're new to this, it's really good to know, though, is configuring your app. Now, I don't have time to go into all of this part, but I want to assure you that there are screenshots and step-by-step instructions on how to actually do this for a .NET Core app, and really just any server-side type web app like the one I'm showing right now. And literally, it'll take you like 5 minutes. So if you're new to this, there'll be step-by-step on how to get through that. Now, the last little piece I want to show you is, okay, that's great. So we just hooked up our authentication, how tokens can get exchanged, but how do we actually make the Microsoft Graph call? Well, the assembly I showed earlier for the web Microsoft Graph, there's a Graph service client in there. And if you haven't worked with Microsoft Graph before, I would encourage you to go to aka.ms/GE Graph Explorer. And this is where you can actually play with it. So like, here's my profile, and I should get back some JSON. My bandwidth is not cooperating right now. Email and stuff like that. So this is a great place to learn about the API calls. Notice this me/messages right here. Okay, let me go ahead and go back. And what we're going to do is, instead of having to do raw REST calls, we're going to use this Graph service client here. We're going to inject it right there, store it in a field. And now look at this code right here. All right, it's actually going to say, let's use this Graph service client. There's the me, that would just get the profile. That's actually in the Graph profile client class. But in this case, we want email messages. That's what I want to request. Now, there's a lot of data with email messages, and I'm saying I only want the subject, the preview of the body, not the whole body, because that can get kind of big, And then I want the receive date time here. And we're going to order by that and then grab the first 10, the top 10. Now, there's some more code in here for the load the next batch if you're interested. That's all in the Learn module, but I'm real close to out of time here. So luckily, I'm on schedule. I have one last thing to show you. So this is great because now we have a reusable method called get user messages to go get our messages, but we need to display them in a page, right? So this is using ASP.NET Core Razor Pages. If you haven't used that before and you do .NET Core, it is awesome. I love it. MVC is great, but I'm a big fan of Razor Pages. So I'm going to go into email cshtml.cs, and you'll see it's pretty clean. We have a little authorization attribute on top of our class. But other than that, we have two properties, and we inject our graph email client. Okay, we're going to store that in a field. And now look how clean it is to actually get our messages. Now, this one adds just a little bit more for the batching aspect, but if you look up this method and go through the module, it's pretty much the identical code I showed here. In fact, you'll see it right here. But Microsoft Graph will return you a link you can use to get the next page, if you will, or batch of emails. So this will all be in the code if you're interested in doing that. Now, once we get our messages, we hook that into a property called messages, and then, of course, we render it. So in here, we check if the user is authenticated. Do we have any messages? And then if we do, we're going to go ahead and loop through them. And this is where you actually saw those little kind of cards, if you will, written out. So that's a really quick overview. It's actually a lot to throw at you in 15 minutes or so. But to wrap up, my kind of final thoughts on this for you are the following. If you are currently working on an app that integrates, RESTful API calls and maybe database data, which probably almost all of you are, I would challenge you to consider what type of organizational data could you include. Now, we just covered email, but there are many other examples out there you can include so the user doesn't have to go jumping around. They can get right to that data right in the app. It's amazing how much more productive we can make our users. It reduces user context switching. Of course, we secure the app with Microsoft Identity, so it's super secure and there's permissions involved. And then, as I showed, you can encapsulate this and you could reuse it across apps as well. You can make a reusable class library, for example. So if you get some time, have fun and go through the Learn module on your own. Here's the link again. And I hope you enjoyed what you heard. I hope if you haven't thought about doing this, that you will, because it really can take your apps to the next level. So with that, let me go ahead and stop sharing here, and I'll turn it back over to everybody else.
Thank you, Don. Really, really great teaser and a quick demo related on the power of the Microsoft Graph. So really, really awesome stuff.
Thanks. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely.